And suddenly I had this thought, what if there were nothing? And it so panicked me. I mean, really panicked me that I got scared. I sweated, and I forced myself to put it out of my mind. It frightened me so much, and literally for I don't know a decade or 2 decades, I couldn't remember what had scared me so, and forgot about it. And then I tried to remember that event, and suddenly I remembered. Why is there something rather than... And from that time forward, when I remembered what scared me as a child, that question has haunted me. Now, you've written a book on it.
That's true.
And I really come to you to hear, why is there something rather than nothing?
I see. Well, let me say, your reaction, it's interesting because, if you like, it's quite a proportionate reaction in that it's probably philosophy's most puzzling topic. So to feel the way you did, it reflects.
I mean, I wasn't just puzzled. I was just terrified.
Yes,
that's right.
Yes.
That's right. Yes. I still am if I think about it.
Right. Well, it's a fascinating one because it seems impossible at first blush to give any sort of coherent answer. As you no doubt know, it's had a longish history. It started off with Leibniz, and many major philosophers have tried their hand at giving an answer. And I think probably these days it's come back a bit after being slightly dormant. And it, together with why is there this universe, are two of the main questions that people agonize about.
What have been historically some of the kinds of answers that philosophers have given to this question from Leibniz on?
Well, perhaps the major worked out answers to be found in someone like St. Thomas Aquinas. Mm-hmm. So his answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing, was, well, there is God, and God has to exist. He exists of necessity. Now, what I'm interested in is whether or not that makes sense and can be substantiated. But perhaps a prior question is, clearly if someone says, why is there something rather than nothing, they think that there being nothing is a genuine alternative. And the question, you've got to explain why we have one alternative realized rather than the other. Well, Aquinas is in effect saying, no, there being nothing isn't a genuine alternative. There has to be something because there has to be God. I'm inclined to agree with the general position that there has to be something or other, but the theistic solution seems to me to have its difficulties. Now, many of the difficulties centre around this slippery term nothing. Suppose I say to you, there's nothing between these two bodies. Now, you might take that in two ways. You might say, well, in that case, they must be touching. Or you might say, and perhaps this is the more natural one, there's just empty space. Okay. Now, which one are we interested in? I think it's the first one. That's the literal sense of there being nothing, because space is not nothing. You can travel through space. You speak of the depths of space and so forth. You can measure a space. And indeed, if you say something like space is a poor conductor of electricity, that's contradicted by nothing is a poor conductor of electricity, right? So they don't keep in step. All right. When cosmologists talk about the beginnings of the universe originating from nothing, they nearly always, if not always, think of nothing in the non-literal sense, where it means empty space. And so
for cosmologists, nothing is filled with stuff.
Well, that's right.
All this quantum foam and things going on. So the nothing of the cosmologist is, to me, not nothing.
That's right. It's seething with activity.
Seething is right.
Yeah. And so you can see why there's a difficulty getting a scientific answer to the original question.
Yes.
If there's a presupposition that you have at least a space, even if it's an empty space, then that is something that has to be accounted for. And as you say, you have these people talking about quantum fluctuations in the space giving rise to the universe as we know it.
So clearly that's nothing. That's not nothing. That's off the table.
Yeah, that's right. So now we've got to consider whether there could be nothing in the literal sense.
Yes.
And as I say, it's a slippery term because you can say things like, oh, nothing might have existed. But if you say that, you're in effect saying, well, this might not have existed, this might not have existed, and so on. And you don't mean that. You want to say, no, there's a thing called nothing that might have been in place of something. And the trouble is, it's always so negative. Take this idea. People speak in terms of there being nothing, and then the universe coming into being, or beginning to exist. Now, does that make sense? Could there be a preceding state of affairs of there being nothing, which gives way to a state of affairs where there's something? Well, what are the conditions in which you can speak of something as beginning to exist? Isn't it that there has to be a time when it doesn't exist, followed by a time when it does exist? But if you don't have anything at all, then you don't have time. So it doesn't make sense to think of an antecedent state of affairs of nothing being followed by something. And the same actually, rather paradoxically, goes for ceasing to exist, because when something ceases to exist, it exists for a time, and then after that point of time, it doesn't exist. So here we have a problem of thinking of nothing as sort of bounding the universe in any sense. And my feeling is that people who talk confidently about nothing do so because of the analogy with an empty space. So there's nothing in the cupboard. Right, makes perfectly good sense, but there's still the cupboard. So if that's our model, then we imagine getting rid of the cupboard and any other container, and here we have just empty space. Now, as I say, empty space is not good enough.
Not good enough.
And it's very hard to give any substance to the notion of there being nothing that will give you a genuine alternative to our initial question.
Well, in science, we now know that space and time are together, and that mass, space, and time sort of have a relationship together. And you take away in this universe, you can take away things one by one, not just all the mass and all the energy. That's the easy part, but then take away all the space and time and the feelings of cosmology. It seems pretty well universally accepted, is that at the beginning, at 10 to the minus 40th or 80th second, they can go back to that time, and the universe was smaller than almost anything imaginable, and there was no space except for that one very small. And then conceptually, we can just eliminate that pretty quickly, so that really is nothing. There's no space.
Well,
and you just have to make the step, and it says, okay, that one micro, very hot essence that began the Big Bang never happened. And so then you really do have nothing, because you don't have space.
Or time.
Or time.
That's right, yeah. But then can you say that you have nothing in the sense that that's an actual state of affairs that obtained at this point? And that's the thing that I have most trouble with making sense. Because, look...
Nothing makes sense.
Nothing makes sense. There you are. Now, that's a good way of showing the slippery character of the word, isn't it?
Right.
And look, just to go back to the picture that we have is of, you say, things going out of existence, say, one by one. Just like all the stars going out, like lights, you imagine
Week
them.
out, right.
Yeah, and then everything starts to go around you, and so you say, well, look, that's fine, isn't it? We're left with nothing. That's just the culmination of this. But then you notice that if a person thinks in those terms, you could, by reversing the process, repopulate the world.
Yes.
And that's because, as I say, he's left with a setting, a framework into which things come and go. And so...
It seems impossible, even if you have nothing, not to have possibilities. I mean, even if you had nothing forever and there was nothing, it would seem impossible to eliminate that there, even in that nothing, there would be possibilities that possibilities could come into existence, or that logical operations or numbers or 5 times 4 equals 20, that if there were something that represented a 5 and something that represented a 4, that 5 of the 4s would be 20 of the things, even if nothing ever happened.
That's true. quite generally, truths of arithmetic are independent of any matters of empirical fact, like truths of logic. A famous remark, I think, is Wittgenstein: if either it's raining or it's not raining, doesn't tell you anything about the weather. Right? There's no commitment at all in these. So I don't think you're committed to anything of substance if you say it would be a logical truth in any world that so-and-so held.
So what are the, you mentioned a theistic hypothesis that God was necessary and therefore it's impossible not to be nothing because God was always there.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Now, what are some other approaches to the subject that have been advanced?
I think probably three approaches: the theistic approach, and then the sorts of things that physicists, cosmologists say today, where they think it makes sense to suppose that things came into existence spontaneously, perhaps, rather than with a cause. And then there's a view that used to be quite common, namely, explanations have to come to an end at some point. So perhaps we just have to confront it as a brute fact that there is something. You can't get beyond that. There's no explaining it. And that's that. So that was for quite a number of years fairly common around these parts, I think.
I think I had read someplace that Bertrand Russell said, the universe exists, that's all. And that was the end of his commentary.
Yes, I certainly don't recall him addressing the question in any detail. He just had firm views about what was a bad answer.
Which was everything else.
Well, that's right, yes.
But that's just incredibly not satisfying. I mean, is it just a defect of a human mind, or my own, incapacity or immaturity? But I mean, it's a deep hunger, and that is a desire to go more than that. To say brute fact, it just seems that that's not enough.
Well, if it's a conceptual truth, there is something. If there has to be something, then that's an end to your agonizing, surely. And if you could refute all the arguments that say, well, we can make sense of a state of affairs in which there's nothing at all, then, of course, the problem is still with you. What I'm suggesting is we only think we can make sense of that because we model it on the case of empty space, which that has its own difficulties, as you've indicated, but at least it seems to give us a starting point. We've got a setting here, but that's unfortunately not nothing. And there's no such thing as there being nothing.